I think we're ready to call the meeting back to order. Good afternoon. Thank you for coming, and we are going to start with the Academics and Student Success Committee. And I will hand over the chair to Committee Chair Smullen.
Thank you, Chair Cooper. Just a quick reminder, the members of the Academics and Student Success Committee are Trustees Coleman, Harvey, Latipo, Platt, Lateral, and myself. Our faculty representative to advise the committee is Dr. Ben Bates. This morning we're going to have presentations and discussions on the academic planning strategy that includes new program launch initiative, Ohio Honors Program, retention and persistence efforts, and an update on the fall 2021 entering class. I'd like to ask Provost Sayers to now take us through the agenda.
Thank you so much. We're really excited today to start with an update on the progress on the academic planning and strategy recommendations that we shared in April. I'm going to give a very brief status update, and then Brad Cohn, our Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer, will focus on one particular initiative to support the launch of new and innovative programs. In April, we talked about starting to build on our strengths as an institution to shape a distinctive identity that is nationally prominent but focuses on individual student success, that provides excellent professional education but is grounded in those lifelong benefits of the liberal arts, and where our research, scholarship, and creative activity not only creates new knowledge but impacts our communities and our students, and where we provide a distinctive experience-based learning experience across all of our modalities. And really, in order to do that, we talked about focusing on the academic side in 4 areas: academic quality, student success and student experience, enrollment, and financial sustainability. So one of the reasons we're going to be talking about supporting innovative academic programs today is because innovative academic programs are critical to all 4 of those areas. And you'll hear an example of that when Dean Skinner and his team talk a little bit about the impact of the Ohio Honors Program as a really innovative program a little bit later. Also in April, we shared a very high-level timeline for implementing the academic planning and strategy recommendations, including work planned for this summer. We are currently on track for all of those recommendations on the timeline, including new program launch. And as we shared in April, a cleaner, smoother, and more open program launch that brings our faculty's best ideas forward and then supports them to move them quickly to serve new groups of students is one of the important material impacts we plan as an outcome of this academic planning and strategy process for the coming year. So now I'm going to turn it over to Brad Cohn.
Good afternoon, everyone. So the recommendations that came forward ultimately pointed to 3 areas of focus, as you can see here, along with some high-level examples of each. Leveraging our strengths, closing gaps where we have core expertise but haven't developed the programs that we're capable of developing, and pursuing innovation. For those of you who haven't had the privilege, launching new programs is not easy. There are internal requirements and approval processes, external constraints, and notifications and approvals and the need to mobilize resources across the university at different stages of development. Some of you may recall the Academic Innovation Accelerator, a multi-year grant that I led. It was among the first to receive full funding from Joe Shields' Innovation Grant a few years ago. For this initiative, we're creating a process that builds upon the lessons learned from that accelerator and really embracing the accelerator model. We're encouraging ideas by creating a low threshold, a low barrier to entry. Give us a few hundred words. What are you thinking? What would you like to see created at the university? We are going to combine, as in the spirit of an accelerator, combine the folks who come forward with those ideas. We're going to bring expertise from the university to partner with them and collaborate on making that idea as strong and interesting and viable as we can make it. We're going to evaluate those ideas, and we're going to prioritize and launch those ideas, those programs, and opportunities that we as a university think are credible and appropriate for the university to add to its portfolio. So this approach reduces burdens on our faculty by providing dedicated support so that they can focus on developing the program and course design. In the spirit of the recommendations that came out of the PPP group, we are aiming to use this to improve our program launch process, to identify and remove barriers, and to help those ideas forward as quickly and efficiently as we can. And perhaps most importantly, we will be mobilizing a coordinated support model to ensure that we have key administrative units aware, on board, and informing those ideas as they move toward launch. So, what's our timeline? As you just heard from the provost, we received recommendations late this spring. We've already operationalized this by the provost and I issued an email call on Monday afternoon. We set up a website that can capture the ideas, and I'm amazed to report that as of this morning, we already have 7 submissions. So I think we are going to have our hands full this summer with ideas that are coming forward that we are excited to review and engage faculty in developing and moving toward launch. And our aim is to launch programs as early as fall 22. That is an aggressive timeline for this university, so I want to issue a cautionary note. External constraints are real on our ability to launch. There are state, federal, and accrediting body constraints that may delay launch of some of our best ideas. But our aim is to move as quickly and efficiently as we can and launch as effectively as we can some new programs that will add to our portfolio.
When you talk about constraints, are you referring to timing? How long it may take those entities to help move things along and get things approved?
That's correct. We worked really intentionally here at the university to remove as much of the time constraints as we're in possession of, but we have external bodies that may meet only quarterly, or they have a queue themselves that they're trying to manage and they're understaffed, or it gets returned for further consideration. So we have time constraints that we cannot control. And so our aim is to maximize our ability internally to get moving as quickly as we can, and to ensure that we're prepared to launch as soon as we get those external approvals where those are necessary. We're also working to seek parallel approval where we can, so we can condense the timeline in that way. And we're also formally and always working with our external partners to help them appreciate the ways in which their desire for us to innovate is constrained by their decisions. So we're working as partners to try to improve that process as much as we can. And Laurel and Taylor has been among the people who's worked so closely with HLC and our accrediting agencies to help them appreciate that and to work as a partner in letting them know, hey, we're bringing something new, it's innovative, how can we make sure that this goes smoothly? So there's a lot of coordination in that respect that's part of our design for this program launch.
Great, thank you.
And I'll just add that the deans were involved in kind of crafting the process as well. And the seven submissions in 48 hours, even before we launched, we got a list of 10 prospective programs from someone just asking, hey, is this what you're thinking of? So creating a space where people can bring forward those ideas and then giving them the support to move that forward quickly. We're already seeing those ideas bubble forward just from talking about a process like this. So we're really excited and encouraged.
We are.
All right, so I think unless there are other questions, we will move to hearing about one of our existing or nascent innovative programs, the Ohio Honors Program. And I think I'm going to get out of the way so that our presenters can come all join.
Well, good afternoon all, and I hope you enjoyed the tour of the wonderful 29 Park Place and Carriage House facility, and what a big difference that's going to make for this university at large. So 50 years ago, Ohio University took a massive risk. It generated, it started a new college, the Honors Tutorial College, using a system of tutorials that isn't seen in the United States. And it took a huge leap of faith doing that. But one of the problems, you could say, with the Honors Tutorial College is it only was able to impact a very small percentage of the students who came to Ohio University. And I would argue that it took as big a leap of trust to come up with a new program called the Ohio Honors Program. And this was under President Nellis. He recognized that we needed to be competitive with other universities in providing an honors education that they were able to get at other universities. But it's not the same. And to this, Provost Sayers and Carrie Frith played a major role in developing this new Ohio Honors Program. I think we could go to the next slide. Oh, there we go. But you're going to see the numbers here if we take out the pilot launch, but this is just 2 years ago. I remember being in this room two years ago in Eastern Ohio, and we were just talking about the full launch. We had no idea of the size of this and the interest in this program. But, and although this may sort of seem smooth to you on the slide here, I can tell you it was not, in the context that there were a lot of people changes. And to make this successful, you needed to have an incredible person driving this forward. And that's where I'm going to hand this over to Dr. Christy Zempner, who has been that person.
Thank you so much, Dean Skinner. Thank you, trustees, for inviting us here today. Dean Skinner is very humble in terms of his role in this. And certainly I appreciate everything that he had to say, but this is the kind of program that really doesn't succeed without a lot of collaboration. And I'm going to talk a little bit as we go along about some of the specific partnerships we have, but really we work with every academic college, with administrative offices and student services offices all over campus, and none of this will be possible without them. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we're very excited about is we will be expanding the program to regional campus students this fall on a pilot basis. This is something that I had hoped that we would be able to do. I did not anticipate being able to overcome all the hurdles to be able to do it as quickly as we're doing it. But we, again, collaboratively, we've had great support from faculty and student service folks at all the regional campuses. So we will be bringing in up to 5 students from Chillicothe, Eastern, Lancaster, Zanesville, and Southern this fall, again, to launch a pilot cohort of regional campus students in the program that we hope then, as we move forward, regional campus students will have the same access to the Ohio Honors Program as Athens campus students have ultimately. Next slide, please. So for those of you who maybe weren't here for that meeting a couple of years ago and are not as familiar with the program, one of the things that distinguishes us from many other honors programs is that we blend curricular and extracurricular or co-curricular experiences. So this is a program very much grounded in experiential learning. In addition to the honors level coursework that our students do, they're expected to complete several in-depth co-curricular out-of-class experiences, things like working on research projects with faculty, things like internships, things like significant student leadership roles, work with nonprofit organizations in the region, work in the creative arts and that sort of thing. So this is a little bit of a different kind of honors program, and we're certainly seeing a broad range of students really thrive in that experiential focused program. Next slide, please. So again, just as an overview, this is a program, as Dean Skinner mentioned, offering greater access to honors opportunities was a big driver, a big motivator for the development of the Ohio Honors Program. And so we are compatible with any non-tutorial major students. We have students from majors all across the university in the program. As I said, it's grounded in experiential learning, so that blend of honors level curriculum and those in-depth co-curricular experiences. Basically, our students are expected to complete an average of 2 experiences per semester that they're here. We create some flexibility. We'll talk about Maddie Moore, who's our first graduate, finished in 2 years, and so we wanted to make sure that we were establishing structure in which students who are in different situations, who might not be here for the full 4 years, can still take advantage of the program and have all the benefits and resources of participating. One of the things I think also that distinguishes our program is for those co-curricular experiences and in our honors level classes, we focus a lot on reflection. Our students all complete a very deep reflection process for each co-curricular experience that they participate in. And I really think, and I've gotten some feedback from students that indicate this really maximizes learning in those experiences and allows them to make connections across both their curricular and co-curricular experiences. That leads into a holistic portfolio that our students complete at the end of their time in Ohio Honors.
Can you elaborate on the reflection process?
Sure. So for the co-curricular experiences, we ask our students to initially submit an individual essay that is kind of a pre-flection, where we ask them to talk about what they're going to pursue, what they're planning to pursue, why they chose it, what skills or knowledge they hope to gain through that experience. And then over the course of the semester, they participate in 2 discussion boards where they're interacting with other students who are also pursuing co-curricular experiences. One is focused on sensory and emotional learning, so thinking about what you're feeling and what you're in a more sensory way, what you're experiencing through these processes, which is helpful to us as advisors in terms of identifying potential challenges that we might need to address with students, but also I think it's helpful to students to think about like what kinds of experiences draw enthusiasm from them or like take energy from them and that sort of thing. And then we get into more of the cognitive learning in the second discussion board. So again, students are interacting with each other, talking about how they're applying maybe concepts that they learned in a classroom in these particular experiences, or maybe skills or concepts that they learned about in other co-curricular experiences, how they're applying them in new situations. And then at the end of the semester, we ask students to complete an individual essay that is sort of a holistic overview of everything they feel like they've learned over the course of the semester in this particular experience, and how that's maybe set them up, for future experiences. So it's also helpful to us in terms of helping students start to identify what they might want to do next in the program. So what might their next co-curricular experience, or where might they want to take classes to build conceptual knowledge about ideas and things like that. So.
Fantastic. Really, on many levels.
Thank you. So again, all this leads up to a portfolio requirement in the final semester. All our students are required to complete a portfolio in which, again, they're drawing on those reflections to talk about what they learned in their different experiences. And this is also a product they can share with graduate or professional school admission boards, with potential employers. It's basically a website that they create that captures all the experiences that they've had in the program and allows them to talk about what they learned in all those experiences and how they've collectively prepared them for whatever the next steps are for them. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned before, this is something that doesn't happen without great partners across the university, and we've been very fortunate to have such enthusiastic partnerships, as I said, with the regional campuses. We've gotten great response from faculty and staff there in the regional campuses. We also do student pathway programming, and we work closely with different folks around campus to develop that. So those are things like workshops or panel discussions. We work closely with the Center for Campus and Community Engagement. One of the examples I was talking about at lunch We had last year, one of our virtual programs was a panel discussion featuring leaders of local nonprofits and local governments talking about the local response to COVID-19 and how nonprofit organizations and local governments work together to develop responses to things like digital infrastructure, but also basic needs like food and clothing and things like that. We have faculty come in and talk about research, do workshops in terms of how students can get involved in undergraduate research and that sort of thing. We've worked with student services offices to develop workshops on leadership and how to get involved in leadership programs on campus and things like that. Those are just a few examples of that. Obviously, with the curricular development, we've worked closely with faculty in all the colleges and departments across the university to develop curriculum for the program. We also, actually, the libraries just recognized us earlier this year for our collaboration with the libraries, with, again, the Center for Campus and Community Engagement and other partners in bringing the Sustainability Film Series to fruition this past year. We also had, last fall, we brought in Tania Mitchell, who is a national expert on race and class conscious development of community engagement processes, and we were able to offer a workshop for faculty to help them take those things into consideration as they're developing community engaged experiences in their class. We hope to have her back again this fall. We've also been able to initiate some projects that we either already have expanded to larger parts of the university or that we hope will expand to larger parts of the university. So Student Opportunity Center, an opportunity matching platform. We have been working with it for a couple of years. It is, the university has a contract now to expand access to that to students across the university. Another thing, so Caroline Bissonette here with me and Maddie Moore, two students from the program, will be talking about their different experiences. But this last spring, we have an engagement lab class, which is a group project-based class that all our students take typically in their first year, where in the past this was a 3-credit-hour class where students came up with their own ideas for projects, and Maddie's experiences from that 3-credit-hour class, and she's actually responsible, her group developed the peer mentor program that we use in our OHP program now. So we're very grateful to her for that. Caroline, this last spring in her engagement lab, was one of the first students to participate in a project, a partnership that we had with the Office of Global Opportunities to match our students with international partners, so largely nonprofit organizations in South Africa, Chile, Ecuador, Argentina. Each group, or each class, the groups of students responded to a challenge presented by that nonprofit organization. It might have been they needed a fundraising strategy or a social media strategy, or in some cases there was some curriculum building they asked students to do. So the students got to interact throughout the semester with those international partners to get international experience in this virtual setting that, you know, we hope will lead to more excitement and more interest in larger international experiences among students as they go. So that's just kind of an overview again of some of the collaborations we do. And I know the best argument I can make for the program will come through the students. So at this point, I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to actually ask Maddie to start for us. Maddie was our first graduate from the program, just graduating this spring. And then when Maddie finishes, I'll ask Caroline to talk a little about her experiences.
Thank you, Dr. Zumter. Thank you so much for asking us to be here today. I'm really excited to talk about the program because I have grown to love it as I have been part of it for the past 2 years. So the major topic I really want to hit here is that the honors program, when I was introduced to it, I knew I was coming into Ohio University as a more non-traditional student. I knew I was only going to be here for 2 years. So I did not, take into consideration HCC or a program like that, but when I learned about the Ohio Honors Program, I was really excited to get involved. I knew that being able to complete my course load in 2 years, I was really going to have to, I I planned on having my main focus be on undergraduate research and things related to my major. But the really great thing about this program is that it opened up experiences that I was not expecting to have, that are tailor-made to the student, and they're very flexible and allowed me to participate in things relating to Athens, the Ohio University community, building skills such as, team building skills, leadership skills that I wouldn't have been able to pursue without the program. I was just not expecting entering Ohio University to have, that sort of flexibility to be able to do all of these things. I was mainly focused on my major. So it was amazing to work through HC 2400 and the engagement lab, as Dr. Zumter mentioned, where me and my group, Brendan Peterson, Anna DeSanto, created a peer mentor program, which was successfully utilized this previous fall semester. And we had about 75 incoming students that participated in the program and 50 peer mentors who gained a leadership co-curricular through this program. So it was a great opportunity for us to help incoming students, it being such a new program, maybe give them information in addition to their curricular information from HC 2400 that we could all benefit from, especially being a new student, not just in the program, but to university in itself. And I just really wanted to touch on that this has just been an amazing experience, and I'm so glad I got to participate, and I'm so excited to see where it goes.
I'll just jump in really quickly and say the timing for the peer mentor program could not have been better when we have incoming students who are largely going to be experiencing a virtual, really an unprecedented first year of university life. Having those peer mentors to provide some of that socialization and some of that support, I can't even tell you how valuable it was. So we're really grateful to Maddie and her partners for having created that opportunity. Now I'm going to stop talking again and turn it over to Caroline.
Hi, everybody. I'm Caroline. And as we have already kind of discussed, I was part of the engagement lab last semester. And it says on the screen that I'm fall 2020 cohort, but I'm actually fall 2019. Normally you do the engagement lab as a freshman your second semester, but I was actually abroad my second semester, so I had to do it my sophomore year. But I actually preferred it that way in the end. But anyway, yeah, so I participated in the engagement lab where we got to work with a nonprofit located in Argentina called Life Argentina. And at the very beginning of the semester, they put us into 3 groups of 10. So I was in a group with 9 other people, which sounds like a lot. And at first, it definitely was. The first team's call the silence of it was definitely a little deafening. But once I got my group talking a lot, and they ended up being such amazing students. They were so eager to learn and get involved with everything, which made it really easy for me because for some reason I was elected the group leader. And I told them right off the bat, I was like, I honestly don't really know what's going on right now. But luckily they were able to explain it to me. And I think my honesty right off the bat really opened up the rest of the group to so much discussion. We ended up loving the group so much. And it really opened a lot of doors for a lot of people. I'll touch on that at the end for myself. But I think my group is what made the experience also really positive and profitable for me. We were able to work together. Our group specifically was tasked with coming up with a fundraising strategy for Life Argentina, whose goal is mainly to raise money and school supplies for underprivileged children in the Buenos Aires area. So we got to work together and really create something from the ground up. The nice thing about my engagement lab being an international experience was that we all knew the same amount of nothing about Argentina. Like my group right off the bat knew that I'm a German major. Like I'm a German and journalism major, and now I'm like coming up with fundraising strategies for a nonprofit in Argentina. It was super random for all of us, But it was nice that we all got to start at square one. And it was super unintimidating for the entire group to openly share ideas and openly express, you know, whatever, I don't know, whatever they wanted to express, I guess. But that's what made it so nice that it was a global experience, was because we were all starting at square one and we all knew the same amount of nothing, like I said. So that was one thing that was really nice. And then another thing that I think my entire group took from the experience was just the knowledge of how important open and clear communication is, especially when you're working with a nonprofit in Argentina. So like every email you send, every text you send, we learned that it has to be so clear just to like make the communication that much easier. And I'm already putting these skills to the test myself because I'm actually pursuing an internship with Life Argentina, which I would have never gotten if it weren't for OHP, so I'm so grateful. But yeah, so it was just all really nice how it worked out for me specifically. And I have to thank my group as well because they were wonderful. But overall, I hope that you guys keep going with the Engagement Lab as a global experience because I think it also did motivate, I would say almost all of the members of my group want more international experience now because it was such a positive experience for us. And yeah, so otherwise it was really nice.
Can I ask a couple questions, Chair? So did they make that operational, your funding plan?
Okay, so yes, I'll say yes. I'm working on that now in the internship because I asked my honors professor who was facilitating the Engagement Lab, Erin Jordan, love her so much. I asked her if Life Argentina would possibly be interested in hiring me as an intern because I know that the HTC students in the fall also gave Life Argentina ideas on how to increase their funding, and that's also what we were doing. So they had so many ideas, but there's like 3 people like actually working at Life Argentina. So I was like, how are they going to like do this? Like we gave you so many ideas, but are you actually gonna do anything with it? So I reached out to them and asked if I could pursue an internship. So that's what myself and my partner, Hannah Moore, she's also a student. She's actually fall 2020 cohort. That's what we're working on now, actually putting these fundraising ideas into place and raising money for Life Argentina.
Great. So similar question to Maddie. Are you redoing the mentorship program, I assume? And there are new mentors every year? How's this work? How's it continue?
Yeah, so we actually worked really closely with Amanda Remnant. She's a OHP honors advisor. And, you know, since I was leaving this year, I know her and Brendan and Anna have put a lot of thought in how they're going to retain mentors. Because once you complete mentorship for one semester, it was kind of a gray area on how we were going to incentivize it for the next year because they've already gained the co-curricular and the leadership category. Yeah. So we believe that people who were mentees instead will hopefully see, I believe they are, you know, targeting that demographic and hopefully showing them, you know, you can be a mentor just like you were mentored and gain this leadership co-curricular and gain this experience. And I'm not sure exactly on the numbers right now. I've not touched base with them in a couple of months, but I know they are definitely planning to continue it in the fall semester, especially with the large cohort coming in.
Yeah, they 100% are. They're already sending emails about people applying to be mentors and stuff.
Great, thank you both very much.
I can add a little addendum here. We wrote a paper up on this to submit to the National Honors Convention in the fall, which was accepted because this is kind of new. Nobody else has been doing this, and it's something that it came about in some ways due to the pandemic, but we're going to take it out past the pandemic. So it's very exciting.
This is in terms of the international partnerships.
Yeah, and we've also working with OGO to track these students into the future. So one of the desires here is we will have increased international engagement. So we're working with them to retain this information so we can actually track that and see what difference it makes.
if I may, I assume that this kind of a program costs more to deliver to those who participate in it and for the school. Can you compare the cost of this kind of a program for the honors program to what it costs the university for just a regular non-honors student, if you understand my question?
So are we able to compare the cost of the OHP program versus if you're just a general student coming in?
Yes.
I'd have to look to the provost for some of that answer, but the truth is this is done very economically.
Okay.
And one of the things that we do try to do with students is identify things that they're already going to be doing. So if there's an internship that's required as part of your major, treating that as one of your co-curriculars. And so we really try, rather than like loading so much onto students that it becomes unbearable, we really try to find what they're already doing and create as holistic an experience as possible. And again, I think that reflection process allows students to make connections across those experiences that they wouldn't necessarily make otherwise.
Are parts of the program itself, are parts of the program scalable so they could be made more of it available to more students, assuming the interest was there?
Well, we're going to find out with 600 or so incoming first-year students. You know, I will say, and certainly Dean Skinner has been so helpful in this. We have tried to be as flexible as we can in these early years of the program. So as I was talking about the engagement lab, that started out as a 3-credit-hour class. We were finding students in high credit hour majors, engineering students, other students like that were just having a hard time fitting an elective like that into their schedules. So we reimagined it as a 1-credit-hour class, and as part of that, in the 3-credit-hour class, so Maddie and her partners created their own project. In converting it to a 1-credit-hour class, we partner the students with a partner who gives them the challenge to work on and that sort of thing. So we've created more curriculum than we initially thought we were going to have to create in the honors college itself, but that's turned out to work out really well. Students are really excited about some of the classes that we're offering. Again, that's an area where we get support from across the university. So Mary Nally, who's the director for the Center of Campus and Community Engagement, she co-teaches with me an introduction to ethical community engagement. And we've got partners around the university who have been very enthusiastic about getting involved with our curriculum development as well.
Any other questions? Well, Maddie and Caroline, I just want to say thank you for sharing your experience with us. And to all of you, we can't wait to see what you continue to do with this program. It's very exciting stuff.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, I just can't resist going back to this first slide. The original goal for Ohio Honors was 200 to 250 per cohort. And we're looking at, I'm a little worried, 600, right? Yeah. And that really tells you what an innovative program can do to draw students. Mm-hmm. And as Dean Skinner said, we're curating the rich experiences we already have. So the resources that we're devoting are really about advising and these kind of bringing the students together in these honors seminars, which substitute for first-year seminars that we already offer. So it is really about building and helping students navigate the incredible opportunities we already have and enriching that in a really intentional way. That is just, as you can see, our students are knocking it out of the park when they are helping to co-create how the program is actually going to continue. It's just phenomenal. So very excited about that. I think we are going to now move to retention and persistence, and I'm going to ask my folks to, I think they're being brought in or coming forward, and we're going to have a little bit of musical chairs because we have, I think, 5 people in 4 chairs, so you'll see a little bit of chair switching as we go forward, and because of that, I will ask people to introduce themselves as they start their section rather than having them shout from the background when they're ready. Dr. Klein, you got a haircut. Did you say the same thing?
I did it myself, too.
It looks awesome. Great job. So we are very happy to be able to have the opportunity to share an update on retention and persistence. And I said I brought a team of folks who really work with our faculty, staff, and our students every day to support students' success. And of course, focusing on retention and persistence is critical as we sharpen our identity, because how we approach student success is part of how we define our unique value to our students, and of course also their parents frequently, as well as making sure we're fulfilling our obligation as a public university. The last time we updated the board on retention and persistence, it was January of 2018. So today's update, we're going to focus on 3 different areas. We're going to start with the overall context, including our current student success goals and our current status, as well as just a peek at some of the national research on student success. Then we'll give examples of some of our current and cutting-edge retention and persistent initiatives and their impact or potential. I don't know why I'm getting awesome feedback. I don't know, Jen's magnetic. I don't know what it is.
Don't move.
Of course.
We're teasing you not to move.
Yeah, I'll just go out in the hall. All right, I think I'm good now. Excellent. Context, current initiatives, and then we'll talk briefly about next steps. So, since the 2018 update, we had a university student success planning group that met during late 2018 through 2019 and took a deep dive into a lot of data. And that group had 2 main tasks: to develop a holistic student success plan and then develop overall student success goals for the Athens and regional campuses over the next 5 years. So those retention and graduation goals are shown here. And I think what it's important to understand is that they're not just plucked out of the air, but they're based on eliminating differences in retention and graduation rates, also known as equity gaps, for 3 groups that we identified in the data. And that is African or American or Black students, first-generation students, and Pell eligible or poverty affected students for the Athens campus, and then Pell eligible and first gen for the regional campuses. Now for the most part today, we're gonna really focus on Athens campus retention, or how many first-year students continue to the second year, because retention acts as what we think of as a leading indicator of student success. But I really want to emphasize that holistic student success planning has to focus on persistence past the first year and ultimately on to graduation for all campuses and all modalities. As part of that group's holistic student success planning, they identified 4 broad areas of concentration shown here with key initiatives in each area. And when we assess where we are today, since 2019, we have completed or have in progress all of the items on that plan. So where are we now in retention? As many of you know, on the Athens campus, we've made significant progress on retention over the last several years, as shown here. And we're especially pleased that going into fall 2020, even with the pandemic, Athens retention essentially held from that 2019 cohort. But what does that really mean for retention to have increased more than 2 percentage points? In 2018, when we showed the board our retention rates compared to our peers, or we showed the board our retention rate compared to our peers using 2015 data at the time. And it's important to understand that the largest factor that influences retention is incoming student characteristics, such as high school GPA, standardized test scores, socioeconomic status, and so on. So you would expect institutions with similar incoming student characteristics to have similar retention rates. So in the 2018 board presentation, you can see on the bottom left, institutional research used that 2015 data and pulled a list of 27 research institutions across the country whose students were similar to ours, represented here by the middle 50% for standardized test scores, and compared our retention rates. At that time, Ohio University's retention rate ranked 18th out of that peer group. We just repeated that exercise using 2019 data, again, pulling a list of 27 research university peers with incoming student profiles similar to ours. Our retention rate now ranks 4th out of that peer group. In short, if you look at the few institutions ahead of us now, our goal of 84.7% is attainable, but we have plucked a lot of the low-hanging fruit, especially over the past couple of years, and now we have to really start looking at deeper changes to start making progress. In 2018, we reported on gaps in retention between Pell eligible and first-generation students. And we can see, compared to then, we've made progress on both Pell eligible and first-generation retention since 2016. And I'll note that we were recently awarded a national designation as a first-gen forward advisory institution. We were one of 11 institutions nationally as part of that 2020 cohort. But it's important to realize that a student can have more than one characteristic and that they can have a compounding effect. So where you can see where we still have challenges and have not made progress is where a student is both Pell eligible and first generation. That means we need to focus more attention on both finances and belonging for those students, which leads to the analysis that we'll talk about shortly about the impact of financial need on student success. When we look at African American or Black student retention, we have historically had a retention rate equal or above to our overall retention rate, which is compared to a national average of about an 8 percentage point gap in those retention rates. We did see a decline in African American retention in 2017, but that has now increased to the highest it's been in recent memory. What is critical is to ensure that that persistence rate, that retention rate, persists to graduation. And nationally, there's a 14 percentage point gap in graduation rates between Black and white students. And our gap has been improving and is now less than half of that, but we can do better. So how do we continue to improve student success? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
What percentage of that 68.8% group is that of the university?
I'm sorry, can you say it a little bit louder? I just missed the second part of it.
Sorry.
Oh, how many
that group,
first gen?
in that fourth box there,
I'm gonna
what
look at
percentage of the student population is that?
I'm going to look at my institutional research person to say that she is. So I know that about 27% of our students are Pell eligible, about 30% of our students are first gen. There's significant overlap in that group, but I don't know the exact number. Do you know?
I do not remember off the top of my head, but we'd be happy to provide those numbers for you.
Yeah.
It is a chunk worth worrying about, and the volatility there is not because of small n's.
Not because of what?
Not because it's a small group that has outsized impact if a few people change. Okay, so how do we continue to improve student success and close equity gaps? It is really important to focus on research-based and data-informed practices. I think the history of student success is a lot about best practices and much less about understanding and analyzing the impact of the practices. And that's why research and data is absolutely critical. In fact, a 2019 study found that approximately 40% of student success initiatives had no measurable impact. And also that initiatives that work for one group of students may be ineffective for another. That means we have to prioritize meaningful assessment of student success initiatives and that we have to continue to develop more sophisticated data and modeling. And you'll see a little bit of this in a moment. It's especially important when you can't use an empirical approach because it's not ethical. So for example, you can't allow half of your students to have tutoring and the other half not to, so that you have a control group. It's one of the big challenges in assessing student success work. This study went on to identify the student success practices with the highest impact for various groups, as shown here. And so I want to point out that some of these are recurring themes regardless of the group. And things like meeting with an advisor, which seems really basic, but incredibly important, huge impact on persistence increases. Academic support services like tutoring and supplemental instruction, scholarships, first-year seminars, and career planning. You'll hear how we are weaving these practices intentionally throughout our student success work. So let's turn to some of our current initiatives and their impact. Our holistic student success strategy situates initiatives within a 3-level framework, and I have to give Dr. Bush a shout out for this framework. At the most local level is the intervention. This is a targeted initiative at a specific student population for a specific purpose. The next level is policy, process, and practice. And you can think of that as the everyday business of a university that can either enable students to be successful or put barriers in their way or have inequitable impacts. And finally, systemic changes are really system-wide transformations that impact the experience of all students. And of course, interventions in policy, process, and practice can scale to become systematic transformations if they're successful. So we're now going to turn to several examples of recent work that are both research-based and cutting edge. And we're going to start at the systemic level, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Murphy.
Thank you, Provost Sayers, and good afternoon, trustees. I'm Jen Murphy, the Assistant Vice Provost for the Ohio Guarantee Plus Graduation Plans. It's a long title. So I know that you've heard about this in previous board meetings. I'm just going to go ahead. I had fancy animation here, but I'm just going to put it all up there. You have heard about the Ohio Guarantee Plus in previous board meetings. You're aware of the fixed tuition and fees that we are guaranteeing. But in addition to that now, we are having students co-create graduation plans with their advisor. So that's the addition and the plus that you're seeing now. This concept stems from research regarding a guided pathway model. And we designed these graduation plans for the students to graduate on time and on plan, typically in 4 years or less. So the plans are really customized by each academic program, but they're personalized for each student, which I think is a game changer. It integrates required touch points of academic advising, career coaching, and experiential learning. With the student success data that Provost Sayers just showed you, there's a corollary impact, as you saw, from activities like meeting with an advisor. So being planful about a student's course of study, so having that effect, we believe that our retention benchmarks will increase through implementing graduation plans, which creates agency and accountability for the student, the university, and the advisor who is guiding the student through that process. A true concierge support for the student as they come through our institution. So the intent of using graduation plans is to really formalize the holistic student experience, which happens, as we know, both inside and outside the classroom. The initiative recognizes the learning potential of all experiences and is designed to ensure that all students can achieve academic, professional, and experiential success through overlapping curricular and co-curricular experiences. We believe that students will persist towards graduation through robust milestones like career coaching and advising. I've been saying that a lot, which serves to complement and supplement the curriculum. I think it's important to note here that it also serves to, it offers a baseline of equitable experiences accounting for the disparities across different majors on our campus. So in order to build a sustainable infrastructure to support this massive overhaul, it does require a 3-year rollout. We just launched stage 1 in fall 2020 with 28 programs, as you'll see. An additional 107 programs will launch this fall. And the remaining 106 programs, including regional higher education, will launch in fall 2022. We're implementing it through first-year students only as they come to campus. Finally, the Ohio Guarantee Plus initiative has been selected by the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities as one of 14 recipients of the Gates Foundation Institutional Transformation Grant. The grant allows us to get insight about the efficacy of our student success initiatives and efforts as an institution, specifically to help our institution scale, measure, and brainstorm future achievements for the student success, infrastructure, systems, and overall institutional change. So we're really excited about that. Yeah.
So when you talk about programs, are you referring to students, right?
Academic programs.
Like a major.
Like a major.
Okay.
So that's essentially all.
It will be every
in 3
incoming
years,
student.
they're going to have every program impacted by this.
Stage 1 was the entire College of Business.
Can you elaborate on that? I mean, how does that
So,
look?
I used to work in the College of Business with President Sherman, and we have a proof of concept that we had a strategy there of having students walk through required career coaching, required career classes, advising, experiential components. We saw an increase in our retention and graduation rates because of that. Now we need to scale that. So we had in stage 1, we had the entire College of Business in that, which is about 12 programs, just to give you that sense. We put them in there because there was already an infrastructure to make that happen, but we also wanted to include programs like Undecided Arts and Sciences. That was very different than a College of Business program, to show that a student, regardless of where they are in their academic journey, can go through and persist towards connection points.
I understand now.
Yeah.
It seems like it's very proactive. Sorry, over here.
I was like, what is that?
It's very proactive
Yeah.
and it's very different. And what do you do? Can you just like maybe illustrate, walk us through an example of a student who may not even know this exists, and do you go in and stalk them?
I love that, actually. We call that like proactively engaging the student. That's a great question. So I think what's near and dear to my heart is that I went to a Big Ten school and got lost in the shuffle. So this is really stemmed from that. And students need to opt in. They opt in during orientation. So they are aware of the program right away, actually today. Actually, not today, it's Thursday, but tomorrow. So they know about the program, what's going to happen, and then an advisor will take them and say, you're now in this program. We're using mechanisms like learning communities, which 97% of our students are in, to really start that first process and to have them feel really supported and so they understand the journey of when that happens. What we know is that students can sometimes change their minds, have different majors, or decide maybe their junior year they want to have a leadership experience. This program is designed to meet the needs of the student regardless of where they are in that developmental spectrum of persisting through as a student.
Thank you. That's great.
Yeah.
That's really great.
Um, In your business school experience, in where you applied it at business school, what sort of jump in retention rate did you achieve?
I believe we saw an 8%, I'm looking at you, 8% in retention and 4% in graduation. It's flipped. 4% in retention, 8% in completion rates.
That's big.
Graduation rates. And 4-year graduation rates.
That's huge over the 4 years.
So are there any plans to, I guess, make this not its own entity, but in other words, it's maybe an upfront choice for the student? In other words, like instead of going to the business school or going to Scripps or whatever, they're entering this in whatever chosen modality that they want. And it's like a form of the honors program, but it's
Yeah.
really just for success.
You discovered our super secret evil plan.
Yeah, okay.
So that is what's happening. So we anticipate the student will have choice in this. We don't want to dictate and say, this is what you will be doing while you're here. There's enough flexibility in that. Whenever a student hears plan, they might cringe a little bit, like, I don't even know what I want to do next week, let alone what I want to do when I graduate. That's okay. We just want to know that there's support there for when they're ready to engage in that. So they can change majors in colleges, and there will be support in those colleges for wherever that student lands.
But every student will be able to opt into this program, and we're already seeing opt-in rates over 90% because they recognize the value of this
Okay.
regardless of program.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
gonna be my next question. How many students are enrolled in that for this fall?
We won't know that until after BSO, after orientation, where they opt in. But last year was at 90%. And then the ones that we did not get to opt in, we talked with them at learning communities to get more of that rate up. There are 1 or 2 that have completely opted out, but throughout the year they've opted in, and so we're close to that 100% are in the program.
So the opting is actually, it's happening at the
Happening now.
orientation?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll do that on Monday.
Yeah. Coerce your children.
Yeah.
How is this being marketed to students and namely parents, particularly prospective parents? I can imagine that would, or excuse me, prospective students.
I
parents
might
of
ask
students.
Vice President Boninger to talk about that, because she talks quite a lot with our students and parents about this program.
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. So yes, this program has a ton of power. Families understand that when we are receiving their students, that we are helping to provide that structure, that they may be worried about them not necessarily seeking out on their own. In the early stage 1, it was a little bit more difficult to market broadly because it was a narrower set. And so most of that communication, plus the timing of the launch led us to communicate directly with admitted students into eligible programs and make sure that their parents and guardians and supportive family members were aware of those opportunities in the spring season. As we launched into fall 21, we were able to incorporate that messaging more broadly, so we worked closely with Robin Oliver and her team to ensure that this was a key component of our messaging about the value proposition that we talk so much about with Ohio University. And now going into fall 22, with all of our programs, including regional higher education, now eligible to participate, we'll be able to comprehensively blanket all of our prospective student messaging. This will be one of the most forward components as we talk about communication planning and enrollment marketing, understanding that when we talk about affordability in particular, of course price matters, we'll talk about that, but also the amount of time you spend in college matters to your overall affordability. So there's an important value proposition in dollar signs here for families to understand that they can have that nimbleness that Dr. Murphy mentioned. They can make changes, they can make mistakes sometimes, and as long as they are working with our graduation plan advisors and our other staff, we're going to get them back on time and on plan to graduate. And that is really obviously very interesting to parents and guardians, and also I might add to other influencers in the process, our counselors that we work with, our community-based organizations that have been providing similar kinds of structures during the K-12 experience to get students into college. It's very helpful for them to see that we have something like this to receive their students into.
Thank you, that sounds fantastic. And also, is this unique to Ohio University, or is there comparable at other universities?
There's
Can you speak to
not.
that?
Isn't that great?
Fearlessly first, wonderful.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's it, correct?
So you have to pass it.
I know I do. I'm just making sure that I answered all the questions. Great. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Laura Lynn Taylor to discuss policy, process, and practice.
So, hi, good afternoon. I'm Laura Lynn Taylor. I'm the Associate Provost for Institutional Effectiveness and Analytics. And in addition to making progress on retention and closing equity gaps, we're also making progress on using data to inform our policies, processes, and practices. With the implementation of the university's new analytics platform, analytics and decision support, we're also learning more about the factors which most impact our students' retention and completion. And spoiler alert, it seems to be unmet financial need and not academic preparation. The graph here on the right shows the probability bins for students in the fall 2020 class and their likelihood of retaining to the fall of their second year. And the size of the bin represents the number of students that fall into that each bin. You can see that for the fall 2020 class, over 600 students were predicted to have less than a 25% chance of retaining to their second semester. Of these students, over a quarter are Pell eligible, and almost 1/3 are first generation. For these students, they have only a slight reduction in high school GPA and average ACT scores compared to the complete cohort. This 1 point decrease in average ACT score does not have a statistically significant impact on their retention. However, the 0.16 decrease in high school GPA does have a 3 percentage point decrease in their likelihood to retain. However, when we add unmet needs to our graph, with the color representing the average unmet need of the students in each probability bin, you can see that the higher levels of unmet need cluster in the probabilities with the least likelihood to retain. In fact, if we look at students in that lower 25% chance or lower to retain, you'll see that they have an average unmet financial need of almost $10,000, which is more than twice the unmet need of the cohort. Students that have $10,000 in unmet need have a 30 percentage point lower likelihood of retaining till their second year. In fact, unmet need impacts our students throughout the life cycle, from enrollment to completion. And here you can see that students, in comparison between students with unmet need and students with no unmet need, there's an average of a 13 percentage point gap in retention. So what does this mean in practice? Approximately half of our incoming class each year has unmet financial need. And because unmet financial need has such a profound effect on our students' retention and completion, for every $100 in increased cost of attendance, tuition plus room and board, we will lose an additional approximately 100 students prior to graduation, along with the associated tuition revenue and state share of instruction, both for course completions and for degree completions. The large impact of even small increases in our cost of attendance shows how price sensitive even our currently enrolled students are, and reinforces the need for and the impact of scholarships in helping our students retain, which is similar to the 2019 research that Provost Sayers spoke of earlier. And next, Dr. Carrie Bush is going to talk about a specific retention initiative. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I was going to ask if we could look at this as an investment standpoint, meaning for each percentage of retention that we gain, you know, how does that translate into SSI and the other funding we get for degree completion? So in other words, we need to figure out whether we're better off investing in infrastructure, or are we better off investing in increasing our percentages of retention? Because if increasing the percentages of retention gets a better payback, then, you know, these are the things that we need to be focusing on as the board to determine where we spend the limited funds. So all that being said, are there any statistics or any ratios that you can say for every percentage that we increase this, that you know, we gain X amount of dollars?
Yeah, and I'll talk a little bit about that, because what this type of research does is it asks two different questions as a follow-up, right? One is, where is the tipping point where meeting unmet financial need leads to retention, right? And then where does it lead to graduation? Because when we look at kind of the average net revenue that you get from a student, it is quite differential by year because of auxiliary revenue, right, which comes in the first and second year, and because of the way the state's SSI is really half loaded on completion. So that is really what we need to do next. So we know the average net revenue that you get every year. We know now that we have kind of this challenge, and then that leads to the next questions to decide where's the tipping point, and then what's the return on investment versus other types of interventions that could also lead to increased persistence.
Yeah, I just want to be careful that we're not paying kids to come here.
Absolutely. And my concern is, are we paying students to come here but not to finish, which is also not good for the institution or the student.
Right, that would be like doubly worse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But this is, anytime you do this type of analysis, it leads to that next set of questions to figure out what is the actual action and what is the return on that action. Totally agree.
A quick question, if I may. For purposes of these statistics, how do you define unmet financial need?
So unmet financial need is cost of attendance. I don't actually. But
Candace, would you like to address that?
Thanks.
Sure. In this calculation, it would be the total cost of attendance minus what the FAFSA, the financial aid application, determines to be the expected family contribution of the family, minus any aid that the institution allows. So when we have students with zero unmet need, what that would mean is that when they filed the FAFSA, if they did, it came back saying that their family's contribution exceeded the university's cost of attendance. So total cost of attendance minus the EFC, the expected family contribution, minus any financial aid, excluding parent loans and things like that.
Can I just ask, have you guys looked into at all what distinguishes kids who have unmet need from kids who don't? Because the assumption here is that the kids are comparable on everything else. It's just that some have unmet need and some don't. And so therefore, if we meet the unmet need, the kids, they'll look the same. They'll retain the same rates. But if they're different on a bunch of other dimensions, I mean, maybe not. And so I'm just curious whether you've looked into what the features are of kids. I mean, I can guess at some, but I mean, I don't know.
So we have in our modeling looked at a variety of demographic, socioeconomic status, academic preparation metrics. We're actually in the process of bringing even more fields into the model to see if it has more explanatory value. But right now, other than high school GPA having that small impact, it does seem to be unmet financial need and not other components that we're aware of. But we're also looking at trying to replicate some of the work of University of California at Davis and University of Michigan around calculating opportunity scores from students' backgrounds and where they are in U.S. Census Tract, et cetera, to see if we can tease out any other prior opportunity that plays a role. So it is definitely important that we know as much as possible about the students so we can isolate those effects.
And there are things like motivation that are shown through research to have huge impacts on retention that are very hard to capture in incoming characteristics. So this controls for things that are capturable there, but not for those kinds of things.
Hello. I'm Dr. Carrie Bush, and I'm the Interim Dean for University College. And we've talked a little bit about our systems and the policies and procedures and practices that support them. And while evolving and rebuilding those systems are essential to supporting student success, we recognize that even the most well-designed systems will still require some individual intervention. We continue to evaluate and revise our intervention efforts as our systems evolve, as we learn more about the evidence-based practices, and as we carry forward lessons from the pandemic. The Persistence Project, run by the Allen Student Advising Center, has traditionally relied heavily upon the use of My Ohio Success Network electronic notices and email communications to encourage students who are not yet registered for the upcoming semester to do so, with any individual outreach being decentralized. In August of 2020, a central advising team was formed to provide a single point of contact for students at key points during the pandemic. The success of the CAT team demonstrated that some efforts are more effective when centralized. This, in combination with the importance of contact from an advisor, led the Allen Center to change implementation of the Persistence Project this year. In the days prior to spring semester, they utilized 4 graduate assistants and 3 professional staff to individually text or call students who remained unregistered for spring semester. Their ability to reach 768 students resulted in 202 additional students continuing this spring who may otherwise have stopped out. This is just one example of how a well-timed, targeted intervention can significantly impact the persistence of students. Now I'll turn it to Dr. Klein for a very different example of interventions.
Hi, I'm Bob Klein. I'm a professor of mathematics at the Athens campus. The state of Ohio is joined with just 3 other states as part of a $2.1 million national grant to close attainment gaps and using evidence-based methods to ensure that as many students as possible complete their gateway mathematics and English courses during their first year. Doing so moves students who otherwise would have taken a remedial course 1 semester closer to completion. Research firmly establishes that remedial education courses are a significant barrier towards student persistence. Nationally, 1/3 of 4-year students begin in remedial courses, with only slightly more than 1/3 of those graduating within 6 years. This costs students and families more than $1 billion per year nationally. So the state of Ohio and Ohio University as well are therefore working to eliminate remedial coursework responsibly and to the greatest possible extent. Most 2- and 4-year public institutions are participating in strong start to finish, but Ohio University is on the leading edge. as one of only 9 institutions to commit to going to scale, providing a mechanism to help all students enroll directly in Gateway courses without compromising our academic standards of excellence. Our response is a coordinated approach that involves modernizing our mathematics placement system using multiple measures rather than a single one-shot test score. It involves helping academic advisors to guide students to take advantage of these courses and other academic supports. But my focus today is on the design and implementation of 1 credit hour co-requisite courses that provide just-in-time teaching and mindset supports to help students have the greatest likelihood of completing their Gateway courses during their first year. In a sense, co-requisite courses formalize and package the other kinds of supports that you know about already, like tutoring and supplemental instruction. This coordinated and strategic approach is designed to bet on the student. For instance, our regional campuses offered a remedial writing course to hundreds of students each year. As part of Strong Start to Finish, a team of regional English faculty, led by Dr. Lisa Steinhaven, developed a co-requisite course that allows all students to enroll directly into their Gateway course in English. Hundreds of students who in the past would have been identified as needing remediation now start in their Gateway English course with the added support of a co-requisite course. The result? Ohio University no longer teaches remedial English courses, freeing up instructional resources and providing hundreds of students with a strong start. In mathematics, our first pilot offering of a college algebra co-requisite course enrolled 35 students who would have otherwise started in D005, a remedial algebra class. Of those 35 students, 29 succeeded, moving them 1 semester closer towards than they would have been had they started in that remedial course. Importantly, they passed the same assignments and exams as the rest of the class. And that's worth emphasizing. They passed all the same quizzes, tests, homeworks, final exams, and met the same standards. We're not compromising standards. That is a strong start.
That sounds great. What is the, you said 29 out of 35 or something like that?
That was during our pilot course, yes, sir.
Right. What are statistics for like current people that go through the remediation and then take the main course?
I don't have those. I can get those to you, but they are, I will say that the national statistics that I gave you, we mirror those on Ohio University's campus. So the 35% starting, only a third getting through. It's the students who make it through developmental or remedial classes, math classes, it's not a pretty story in terms of their success rates downstream. And that's part of why we're working to resolve this.
So this is a significantly better way to go about doing it, at least statistically at this point.
Yes, and the statistics I'm talking about are also national statistics. This is a national model that has strong research support from states across the country.
Yeah, I guess I wasn't referring necessarily to our data, but data in general.
Sure.
Well, it's a win-win, right? Because they save tuition dollars, and it's generally the ones that can't, we're in the other category that we just talked about. So it's a triple win.
Yes, I believe so. And I would add another category of win to that, Trustee Kashani, which is there is an identity issue with being placed in a developmental math class when you come to the university. And part of what we're trying to do is normalize co-requisite coursework as something that successful students do. So.
Brilliant. Thank you.
You're welcome. This past year, 4 additional design teams have designed co-requisite pathways for students to enroll directly into Gateway quantitative courses. These will be piloted in the coming academic year. We're very excited about it. And so by the end of the coming academic year, all Ohio University students should have the opportunity to enroll directly in a Gateway English and quantitative course with the support needed to succeed. And quantitative courses, the way I use it here, include not only mathematics courses, but philosophy and psychology introductory quantitative courses, which is one way in which we are innovating and on the leading edge across the state and in this national effort. So if you recall the 35% completion rate that I shared on that my first slide, the achievement of our faculty and advising teams in removing the barrier of remediation is a huge step forward in supporting student success and degree completion. Their work is on track to advance the persistence and success of a significant number of students, and it begins with that strong start. Provost Sayers.
I don't miss that about Zoom meetings. It was a lot easier to transition without passing the clicker. I think this slide is really helpful too because it shows the number of students impacted. It's almost 1,500 students who end up in remedial or developmental math courses every year. And once this is scaled, just like the number is 0 now for English, it will be 0 for math. And that is a huge accomplishment. So when we look at next steps, these initiatives at the intervention, policy, process, practice, and systemic levels really pave our way for reaching our retention goals and making sure that our gains in retention continue all the way to graduation, especially as we start to understand the impact of the pandemic on student persistence. That means we must increase focus on understanding the impact of unmet financial need, and possibly addressing that through completion and persistent grants, and by continuing to adjust future scholarship leveraging analysis. We will fully implement the Guarantee Plus graduation plan, intentionally incorporating multiple research-based student success practices and removing barriers like developmental courses so that every student has on-track progress toward a degree. And we must continue to get focused on implementing the actions in the D&I strategic plan to support closing equity gaps and make sure we're supporting all students regardless of modality, campus, or degree. And finally, we'll continue to build and refine our data and analytics capacity to both assess our current initiatives and to guide future initiatives. And then any other questions?
I'd just like to say this is fantastic. This is so helpful because the whole remedial thing has just been something probably wearing on all of us, right? It's such an unfortunate thing for the student and it costs a lot of money and it takes time. So it's just really, really encouraging to hear this. Thank you.
Thank you. All this is fantastic and exciting and because it all makes sense. I do have a question, a concern. I know I've talked to the provost and others before about this, is this incoming cohort and Vice President Al Jones and I were talking beforehand about even Taylor said that even the current cohort of freshmen, there is going to be impacts because of COVID to where we don't really know academically what's going to happen. We can't sit there and say, well, it's going to be 18 to 20%. We just don't know. I mean, it could very well be 25% to 30% because, in my opinion, this incoming freshman cohort has not had the same education that normal cohorts would have. So what do we have in terms of interventions just to your normal average student that because of their lack of growth in the last year and a half, what are we going to do to have warning signs before everything hits the fan, so to speak, to get out in front of this?
Yeah, and I would frame that in a couple of different ways because we know every student has been impacted in K through 12, and it's not even like when next year's cohort goes through, it's all going to be fine and we're not going to have to worry about it anymore, right? This is going to be a structural issue for education for the next several years, right? And when you look at some of the national data that's emerging, there are psychosocial impacts, there are financial impacts, there are academic impacts. And so what we really have to do is craft interventions, but also systemic supports to support that. So right now, we, 2 weeks ago, launched essentially a welcome back pathway for students who had to stop out for any reason to come back with additional support. So those who have been impacted enough that they had to stop, we're trying to build an easy on-ramp back with, you know, customized financial aid advising and academic advising to get them back. And then you have the students who were here last year but didn't integrate on campus the way that we know our first year programs do really well. So I know that University College and Student Affairs are working not just on Welcome Weekend for our new cohort, but a Welcome Back Weekend, so that they can get the social integration that is not the same. Even though they were in learning communities, we did a lot, right? But being in person, that on-campus integration is going to need some support. And then, Carrie, I don't know if you want to talk about some of the conversations you're having about building additional supports around supplemental instruction, academic support, what that is going to look like.
We are having those conversations. No, I think you raise a very good point. So there are some of our services that have been in place and available, and so we're thinking about how we more strategically identify who are the students who stand to benefit from those services, and how can we give timely communication that will bring a student in for service when they may hit a bump in the road. I think we are also beginning to convene some conversations on campus to think more holistically about, besides just individual services like tutoring or supplemental instruction, are there other systemic things we can put in place, like a chemistry boot camp to refresh a little bit if you had perhaps a delay between your first and your second semester of general chem. So we're actually starting some of those conversations now about what, and a lot of this may be things that, again, we used during the pandemic to support remote learning, that we actually are finding uses for to carry forward. So again, I think a lot of it is looking at what we currently do and how we target the right students with those things. How are we prepared to perhaps scale up for a brief period of time and deliver those services effectively? And then also, what is it that we can carry forward from the pandemic that we know will support student success long-term academically?
And I would say I was just going to add two more things. I think the graduation plan has a lot of the supports that we can use double duty for that. The other thing I think is we've been talking with Office of Instructional Innovation about faculty development around what to expect with students who have been impacted by the pandemics, to make sure that we're scaffolding learning, that they're directing students to the supports that we're talking about. I think the other thing that we've been talking about being careful about is we know that there are negative effects from the pandemic, but we also want to avoid any kind of stereotype threat just like Dr. Klein was talking about, being put in a remedial course impacts how a student believes in their ability to succeed. We really want to avoid saying, well, you've been impacted from the pandemic, so you're not as prepared. We want to say, what are the things that affected you during the pandemic that you're coming out stronger from and we can build on? And where are the places where there are gaps that we can help you, because we know that you've made it through a lot and you're going to succeed in college. So even how we frame it is something we want to be really careful of, because the research clearly shows that those self-imposed beliefs have a huge impact on retention as well. And so we don't want to compound any material impacts from the pandemic with ones that we add by how we reframe our discussions about it.
Right along the lines you're talking about, and I can't remember the name of the program that you called for the 1 credit that supplements instead of going.
Co-requisite remediation, yeah.
Yeah. Is there a way that we can actually design a holistic program that kind of mirrors that particular structure, but it's really designed around making sure the student graduates? In other words, they have to meet with the counselor, but they get credit for it. All the different things that we know, kind of like, Steve Jobs says, this is the way you use my product. And, I'm not saying to take away flexibility, but, providing these services is great, but I think the average student, at least I can speak from my perspective, I'm not going to do that stuff unless somebody tells me to do it. And if I'm getting credit for it, well, okay, that's all right then, Yet all the while, they're not realizing that we've just increased their chances of graduating by, 7%. So I know that there's a lot of hoops that you have to jump through to get accreditation issues. So I don't know if there's any way to weave that in.
That's actually a model we use. Our learning communities are accredited courses that have required meetings with advisors as part of it. And I think some of the supplemental instruction is essentially that kind of co-rec model. So I think we're looking at all of those kinds of things. But I would also say the graduation plan has required meetings and resources built in. I think what we've also been looking at is there something in between a co-rec and a supplemental instruction that is more intentional credit bearing that we can tack on? Because one of the things we found when we first launched the English co-requisite course, students who did not identify or were not placed initially in a developmental or remedial course, they wanted the advantage of that. And so I do think there is demand for that, and that there are possibilities that kind of fall along those lines.
And you really catch them really early too, even
Yeah.
part of orientation or whatever, onboarding.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would also add to this that I think, the graduation plans provide an interesting opportunity to think about, are there things similar to a learning community course that would be applicable in a sophomore, junior, or senior year, to your point. So I think since we're in the early stages of the Guarantee Plus graduation plans, we are having those conversations. We've done some initial thinking about that. So again, what are the things that would support a student moving through that plan and being successful, and how might that turn into a one credit class that is developmentally appropriate as sophomore, junior, senior level. So.
In looking at the history of the retention rates, you see a constant. Do you think some of this stuff that is being implemented will create any stability in the long term, or continue to raise the numbers in the long term?
Yeah, the goal is definitely to raise the numbers. One of the reasons you see two lines is because there's always fluctuation. I don't know if it will smooth it out more. I would say we actually have smoothed it out quite a bit the last couple of years. But to really look at trends on retention, you have to kind of look at 3-year rolling averages.
Okay.
But yeah, if it weren't for the pandemic, we were actually on track to hit 82.7, I think, in fall of 2020. So we know that the things that we're doing are going to have an impact, and that is really our goal, is to keep inching up over the next 4 years now to hit that 84.7% retention goal.
So if we look back here, through 2011, has this always been talked about, the retention and has procedures been put in place continuously throughout that time? Some hit or miss, right? Some work, some don't.
I think it's always
been a focus.
I think it's always been a concern. I don't know that it's always been the same level of focus, and I'm not sure it's always been the same. To me, the game changer is the data part. So if you think back to when we started learning communities, we're very cutting edge, and we used our own internal data to see that it was effective and to scale it. But we didn't have the same tools that we have now to say, okay, we've done that and we've gotten our 2 percentage points out of that. Where are the gaps that we should look next?
Okay.
And now
building on that, that's a first-time initiative kind of thing. Okay.
Yeah, and that's really what's different is we don't have to try things based on good, best practices or ideas and then wait 5 years to see if they work. We have kind of this student retention and graduation model that is predictive, and we can run students through it and see what the impact. It's a very different and much faster way to evaluate and move student success initiatives forward, really target.
Okay.
So when a student comes to campus, how do they learn about this? What is there a video? Is it presented to them? Because I'll be honest with you, I'm really confused.
Are you talking about the graduation plans?
Yeah, I'm talking about the remedial. A student comes onto campus. they know I think a lot of the students know they need help. They may not be willing to admit to their friends they need help, but you kind of know. How do you introduce the resources for them to be able to reach out so that they understand the vernacular, the terms? So many of these terms, I think you come onto campus, and I was one of these kids too. You're intimidated not only by the place, but you're intimidated by the words and you're intimidated by the structure. How does a new student who probably comes in knowing they need help, how are they introduced to access this? If that makes any sense.
Yeah, and you've really just articulated beautifully the whole issue of what's called the hidden curriculum in higher education, where there's this whole system of archaic terms and bureaucratic processes that we expect a first-generation student to navigate, right? And then we're shocked when someone doesn't know a bursar is where you pay a bill, right? So we do a lot of things to try to introduce them to that. One is starting with orientation. They're introduced to all of the resources. There are modules where they're introduced to it, but really our biggest tool for that is the learning community, where they are paired with frequently their advisor or a close faculty mentor in a group of 20, and literally the curriculum of that course is to understand the hidden curriculum of the university, including things like a resources scavenger hunt where you go on a tour, there are workshops and study skills, you can do a success coaching opportunity. With remedial, it's a little different because our placement tests prior to orientation, so students are then advised at orientation or shortly thereafter what their options are in a one-on-one way. So as we try to systematically change these processes that are barriers, we're also trying to build in the information and guidance for students to navigate those barriers.
I just know that it's just so scary to ask a question when you don't understand, particularly when you're young.
I was told you should go see your advisor when I was in college. I was terrified. I didn't go because I assumed you were only supposed to go when you were in trouble. Like, I don't know.
I showed up and got rich vetter, and I mean, it's been worse ever since.
But Elizabeth, correct me if I'm wrong, but most students take advantage of or are required to take advantage of learning communities, right?
We are over 95% now, which means it's really only the honors students who aren't participating, and they have their own first year seminar for exactly the same reason.
Yeah.
So it's a huge change in the ability of our students to connect with campus that first semester.
Yeah, and I think most students who come here talk about the value of learning community,
Yeah.
so I think, Scott, it's working.
Yeah.
I was reading an article about dreams, and there is the second dream was about that most people have is about going to college and not knowing where to go, and you keep having it into your adulthood even.
I have the dream where I'm supposed to teach a class and I didn't know about it, and it's the final exam that day, and I have to make up a final exam for that class. So that must be my second dream.
I have the exact opposite dream all the time. Because
Maybe we're in the
never
same
showed
dream.
up. So if we could like pair up the dreams, neither one of us would have any stress.
Yeah, but it is absolutely true, and it affects students disproportionately,
Yeah.
right? And then that feeds into those gaps that are not about academic promise or ability.
Yeah.
They're about the social capital you bring with you, and we can fix that.
Any other questions, board? Okay, moving along.
I gave you some supplemental slides, and I'm going to ask Vice President Boninger to...
Thank you to all of you too for your presentations. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My dream is about my biology final when I overslept, and then in transit to my biology final, a bird found me. So that was lovely. Good afternoon, thanks for having me. I'm here really just to give a quick update on the fall 21 entering class. This is the time of year where we're really between the preliminary information that we shared with you in the spring, and then the final information that we'll share with you, preliminary final, I'll say, in August, and then of course the real final in October. So I want to give you just sort of a sense of what we're seeing, and we're really excited to be able to bring a positive update to you today after some really, really difficult cycles and quite a wild ride, I would say, in American higher education, impacted by the COVID pandemic, of course. I'm going to start and focus quite a bit on the Athens Fall Freshman class, and this will be sort of a precursor to the conversation we'll have in the resources meeting tomorrow with Senior Vice President Schaefer, where we'll talk about the impact of these numbers on an upgraded forecast that has been rendered by the Strategic Enrollment Executive Committee Enrollment Growth Subcommittee. The first thing I would have you know is that applications were continuing to be a little bit down this year. We had seen record applications for the institution for several years in a row. We have seen a little bit of a decline in those numbers. And right now we're about 4% behind in applications year to date. So of course, as we prepare and are in the middle of actually fall 22 and beyond recruitment already, that is one of the things that we're working on, is driving additional applications to make sure that we can support the decisions that we'd like to make throughout the funnel. The admit rate has continued to be strong because of our slightly smaller application pool. Our admits are slightly down as well, just about 2% down. But we have seen extraordinary behavior in our enrollment confirmations, and that's the part that we're really excited about this year. We went into the cycle, remember that last fall we enrolled 3,126 first-year students on the Athens campus. As of right now, we're sitting at just about 3,800 confirmations. We won't have 3,800 students in the fall, and I'll talk a little bit about that concept of MELT, which is the difference between the confirmations and then the students who actually appear in the census snapshot in the fall. But confirmations are looking great, and what this graph shows you, this little snippet here, is a picture of trauma for me and for most enrollment managers around the country. You can see that about a third of our confirmations came in the 2 weeks around the May 1st national candidate reply deadline. And so there were moments in the spring where we were tracking behind as much as 40% in confirmations. And although that was terrifying, it wasn't a complete surprise. We have seen with this class what we refer to as the COVID delay. In the fall when they were submitting their applications, they were slower than the classes before. In campus visits, of course, we had a significant delay in the ability to visit our campus with the shutdown. And in just several of their engagement behaviors, they had been delayed. But just as the provost mentioned, the data that we've been able to bring to retention and student success, we also have a substantial infrastructure of data in enrollment management too. And we were able to see under those numbers some pretty good signs of life. And that means just a lot of activity that students were doing, whether it was website engagements or click-throughs on ads or phone calls to counselors and advisors, FAFSA completions, things that were indicators to us that this class may actually shake through. But you can see that, of course, 29% of those students waited until what felt like to us the last minute to submit that housing contract and deposit. One other update just briefly on the class is that you'll remember we did implement a test optional admission pathway for fall 21, like many of the institutions around the country, and about half of our first year students submitted an application test optional. What's interesting about that is that about 2/3 of our underrepresented applicants submitted an application test optional. So we'll be studying that data and trying to understand, did we really do what we thought we were going to do with that policy change to increase access for some of our underrepresented groups. Just a quick snapshot on this slide about how we're tracking ahead in confirmations. We're up in Ohio, up outside of Ohio. I'm pleased to report that our non-resident strategy that I've briefed you on before, where we have deployed regional recruitment managers in markets where we have good alignment with our alumni, for example. There are 4 of them stationed in Chicago, Dallas, the DC area, and Atlanta, covering the southeastern United States. And all of the areas where they are based, we have seen substantial growth in confirmations. And a shout out to Stacy Oliver in our Chicago region, who has just really revived that market for us. International students are looking really good too, especially in India, where we also have a regional recruitment manager based. That is a question mark for us, of course, when we think about COVID and the continued impacts on the ability for international students to arrive in the country in the fall. But we actually have more students coming to us or planning to come to us from India than we do from Washington, D.C. right now. Underrepresented minority populations have also been really strong for us. In fact, our African American population in the fall 21 class is projected to be up by as much as 50%. And that can be attributed to not only the test optional change that I mentioned, but also a lot of really intentional work with our Diversity and Inclusion Division and the Ebony Bobcat Network in particular. You've heard about the honors program, so I won't dwell on that. And I would say that our average high school GPA is still looking strong. You'll remember that we have increased that GPA over the last couple of years, and it looks like we'll be around flat to up, still kind of depending on how the summer carries through. So I wanted to just kind of talk real quickly about what we think worked. And the caveat here is what seems to have worked. It's a long time until August 23rd, plus 15 days for census. So a lot can happen, as we saw last summer with the pandemic. But we do attribute the growth that we're seeing in part to the test optional admission pathway. Students just had one fewer thing that they needed to do to apply to colleges this year. We also, you'll remember, implemented the Ohio Admission Promise, and this was a commitment that students who applied to Ohio University and submitted an application with at least a 3.0 high school GPA were going to be eligible for admission to the university. And of course, we have many programs with much more competitive admission guidelines, and so they would be able to compete for those spots too if they were eligible. But this allowed us to expedite and bring transparency to a class that was just sort of frozen, especially in the late fall. We extended deadlines, we're really flexible. We continue to be flexible throughout the summer. That has been important for all of us in our lives right now. And you heard a little bit about in the fall when we talked about the Ohio Excellence Awards. This is our new scholarship program. The goals of the program were to drive enrollment at the institution and to increase affiliation and affinity. We wanted to make sure that we were accommodating the new test optional pathway in our program design, and that we were able to maintain or improve all of the key metrics that we report on. It was an interesting program to roll out, certainly, in a year where families were, as I mentioned, just sort of frozen and delayed. It was very well received, and we are excited that it's seems to be driving both enrollment and some significant net tuition revenue as well. That is in part because when we look at how our class is shaping up, as I mentioned, we're up in state by about 129 students or so predicted so far, but we're also up substantially out of state, about 25% or more in our non-resident markets. And of course, those students are bringing not only their tuition revenue, but also that non-resident surcharge that our resident students do not have to pay, of course. I would say also, as we prioritize diversity and inclusion, one of the things that I would have you know about that approach is that we did so across the pool. So this was, in some cases, targeted and segmented communication and marketing and outreach and relationship management. But we brought diversity and inclusion messaging to the fore, similar to the Ohio graduation plan that I mentioned. We are wanting to make sure that our prospective students understand that for all students, this is something that's really important to us, and that was well received by our prospective students and their families. We also worked really closely with the Alumni Association. We have that joint position that is embedded partly within admissions and partly within the Alumni Association, and that became critical in a year where our recruiters, for the most part, were benched and having to rely on virtual means of communication and recruitment. Our alumni who were in communities were able to mobilize and to reach out, to write postcards, to make phone calls, and in some cases even have small events within their areas once things started to open up a little bit. And that has been extraordinarily helpful, not just in Ohio, but around the country. And then just talking about what else we think worked, the campus visit was incredibly important to us. And this is also one of the things that I think puts an asterisk on our expectations for how this class will play through typically about 35 to 40% of our admitted students have visited campus by the time they come to orientation. And when we looked at our numbers going into the yield season after admission and before the final choice, only about 8.6% of our students had visited. And so our team, as soon as we were able, turned up every single dial that we could to get those families to campus, reconfiguring the campus walking tour into that innovative Ohio Paw Print tour, inviting families 6 days, sometimes 7 days a week, accommodating them in groups of 1 initially, and then ultimately in larger COVID-safe groups. And I would give Katie Troyer on our team a lot of props for working with Jenny's team and others to be able to roll that out. It has been extraordinarily important to drive that percentage. It's actually closer to 18% of our admitted pool now that has been able to visit campus before orientation. And virtual events, you know, everybody has done it. We've all been Zooming and Teamsing all day long. We aren't sure what the impact of these activities will be, but some recent research from the EduVentures Corporation indicates that at least preliminarily for at least the 21 class, prospective students indicated that those virtual engagements were as important as the campus visits that they were able to do. So it's very validating for the team who has been doing a lot of this computer-based recruiting and phone-based recruiting over the last year. That's been led under the direction of Rob Callahan. And we are hopeful that those events will continue to have an impact. We could be targeted in a way, we could be intimate in a way with those events that we can't always be when we have a 2,000 person open house event on our campus. Lots of technology innovations. You've heard, I think you mentioned before, a new AI-enabled chatbot, which has been rolled out across the enrollment management website. It's also on Ohio Online. HR will be launching it soon, I believe, and our information technology too. Of course, it answers lots of questions after hours. That is incredibly important for our folks who are in different time zones and for our international population. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't just say what we think worked was just a whole lot of hustle. And I don't mean to suggest that the team didn't have a lot of hustle in the years that we had more challenges, but I have been extraordinarily proud to see the admissions staff, the colleges, the deans, the chairs, the directors, the faculty members who gave up Wednesday night 7 o'clock webinar time, current students, and of course our alumni who have all stepped in to try to help families understand when they couldn't experience it physically, what the benefits and value of an Ohio University education would be for them. That has been extraordinarily important, and I think we'll definitely take that energy into the post-COVID arena. What's next in terms of cycle where we are spending a lot of time looking at the data, as I mentioned, and we're also still very much forward posture in our relationship management and affiliation building with this cohort. We've just launched some yard signs to get into the neighborhoods around Ohio to help folks get excited and spread the word about those students coming to Ohio University. We're in the middle of orientation, as you know. And a lot of what we're doing is what we call MELT prevention. So MELT is that phenomenon where students who are confirmed and all signed up and ready to come don't. And historically, that averages about 3 or 4% a year from the high water mark, or from the, say, the Friday before classes start in August, that about 3 or 4% of our students in 19 and 18 didn't show up at census time. In fall 2020, that number was 11%. And so 11% of our deposited students were not in the census snapshot from August 22nd or so. And that is a number that when we sat down to model and think about what will actually happen with this class and what can we count on, we needed to make some decisions about what number we would plug in for MELT this year. And so that's where having the underlying data becomes really important, so that we can look at what are the other signs of life besides just paying that housing deposit. What is the composition of the class? What does their need look like? What have their engagement activities been? And based on that data and based on what we can see and understanding that there will be still some COVID impact on families' lives, we're modeling about a 4.4% MELT for the 21 class. But what you'll see tomorrow in the numbers when we're looking at the resources data is that assumption. And I present it to you with confidence and also with a little bit of, side eye, because we need to make sure that we're continuing that melt prevention, that we are building those relationships, and that we're supporting those students throughout the way. And we're not exactly sure what that COVID impact will continue to be. It is also the season where we are continuing to accept transfer applications. Those numbers do seem to be tracking a little bit behind prior years. Yesterday was actually the transfer application deadline, so we've extended that. Of course, you know that our community colleges are experiencing significant hits in their enrollment. So this isn't a surprise, but it's also not one that we're willing to just yield to yet. And the transfer team is hard at work trying to drive additional transfer applications. We'll expect to get those throughout the summer. The Ohio Online Front is also the height of our season right now. And there we're talking not only about the RN to BSN program, but also our other non-RN to BSN programs that have become quite popular. And we're tracking ahead in those numbers. And I'm sorry that I forgot what the number was. I want to say it's about 28% ahead of last year. Still a little bit behind 2019, but we're glad to see that recovery from the COVID impacts on those adult student learners as well. And we'll continue to pursue them throughout the summer. So those are the updates that I have for you. And of course, as I mentioned, we'll talk about the impacts, the financial impacts of those numbers tomorrow when we're with Senior Vice President Schaefer, but I would turn it back to the chair for questions. Any questions?
Yes, in one of your earlier, maybe your first slide, you had, the highlights, and one of the bullet points at the bottom had individual colleges. And you didn't really talk about those in terms of the highlights. Can you give some examples?
Sure. So we are seeing really great growth in the colleges that you see listed here. Arts and Sciences is driven in part by the natural sciences. Biological sciences is typically a popular major. Honors Tutorial College saw extraordinary growth this year. You may have seen just on the Today Show or whatever your media of choice might be, that highly selective programs nationally saw significant increases this year, and we think that that also helped the Honors Tutorial College. We had a lot of hustle within the colleges as well, and not just the ones that are seeing this additional growth. The College of Business, for example, used for a period of time the Shea Sales Center student team to deploy and to reach out to prospective students and bring some of those skills. It's not exactly a straight translation from sales to recruitment, but some of those same skills and methodologies were able to affect quite a substantial growth. I think they're looking at around 600 students in the College of Business.
And then one more question. Of the now increased amount of the incoming cohort year on year, do we know, and if you told us this, I'm sorry I missed it, but do we know how many of those, what percentage of those are kids that took a year off?
Oh, yes, we do. Not right this second. I want to say it's around 80 in the first year class, but let me get that number back to you for sure. There's a couple different categories of students in that group. Those are students who took a gap year or may have pursued another change. Some of those students applied last year and have stayed affiliated with us through some programmatic things that we've done all year long. And others of them are new to the cycle, where they graduated from high school in 2020, but are just appearing in our class for the first time.
So it's not an enormous skew that's happening just for this one cohort?
It's not, and I think that is an important point to make, though. When we look nationally at higher education data, and this is true in Ohio as well, sorry, some feedback. We know that there are students missing from American higher education that were lost in the fall 20 cycle. And we are thinking a lot about how do we find those students. For some of them, we know where they are. And then how do we get them back? Because economically, when we think about the future of this country from an access perspective and opportunity perspective, I don't think we can call the fall 20 class a wash. I think there's still work that this institution and every Ohio higher education institution needs to do to bring those students back into higher education and contribute to our citizenry. So we're working on that, and our peers nationally are working on that too. I think it would be all too easy to just sort of wash our hands and say, well, on to class of 21 or 22. But those students deserve to benefit from this experience, and as we are moving forward, we'll be building out recruitment plans for that cohort as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have one. Candace, you mentioned a couple times that community college enrollment is down. And I know many community colleges have pathway programs, partnerships with four-year universities like ours. So has that impacted our enrollment as well?
It is impacting our enrollment. Now, of course, some of our community college partnerships drive students not only to the Athens or the regional campuses, but also into the online programs. And so that's a little bit less visible, and it's an important pipeline for not only those students, but also the university. I think what's interesting about community college enrollment is there are two phenomena. One is, of course, students just not enrolling at all. And so they're seeing that deficit. And the other way that the community college enrollment is impacting us is that the College Credit Plus program has really permeated through the community colleges into the K-12 sector in Ohio. And so for some students who have created an affiliation with a community college as a high school student, there's some inertia that may encourage them to stay at that community college. And for many students, that's a great choice, and that's a perfectly viable pathway to Ohio University. So as we are looking for long-term ways to reinvigorate those relationships with the community colleges, we're not looking just at the two-year associate degree students who are on a traditional four-year path, but also the students who are 18 years old and almost finished with an associate's degree in their first semester at our partner Columbus State or Tri-C or wherever, and how do we get them onto a plan so that the momentum that they have established as a high school student can be continued at Ohio University.
And then back to the remedial piece, I know many parents and students decide to take remedial courses at community colleges because they're cheaper than doing it here.
Right.
Or any other, right, four-year university. Are you seeing anything related to that as it relates to students continuing to take remedial classes at community colleges? Is there a there, any trends, anything there?
No, I'm really not sure. I don't know if Professor Klein would be able to answer that a little bit better. What we see is largely the, as I mentioned, that College Credit Plus pathway, which disallows remedial coursework for the most part. So most of what we're seeing in that population is students who are taking college-level transferable courses as part of the Ohio 36. But I would imagine that the remedial courses are mostly no longer available at four-year institutions. So if a student needs it and has not lighted on a program like ours that allows the co-requisite remediation, then they may need to go to a community college. So that's one of the reasons the question about how do we let people know that these resources exist at an institution like ours, that they could start right away and help address those gaps that they might perceive that they have. That becomes really important in our messaging, in particular on the regional campuses, but on Athens too, and with that Ohio Online pathway from community colleges.
Thank you.
So the yield is so great to see, and it's so great to hear about the hustle that everybody put into it. And maybe it's too much to ask, but if there were ever a point at which we could, do a little experimentation on the efforts to generate yield, because if you're going to show me, here are the outcomes for the students that we contacted, and here are the outcomes for the students we didn't. I mean, some students, the ones you're able to contact might have been more likely to come anyway, right? So ideally, if we could sort of randomize who we're contacting and then get, that would give us some better evidence about the effects of and different ways of trying to get the yield up. And so it's probably doable.
I think it's doable for sure in certain categories. I think that's a good observation. It's a little bit similar to what the provost mentioned around risk. When there are some activities that we know are going to be effective, we wouldn't want to withhold those activities from a population. But what we're really excited about on the data front right now is the work that we've done to build not only a predictive model, but also a prescriptive model. And what this allows us to do is look sort of in the big picture and then also at the unit record level to understand for a group of students or a particular student, what might be for that set of characteristics the most impactful next step that we can take. And that particular system that we're using allows us to experiment in a way that feels not too risky and also really quite exciting. So that is something that we're just in the process of coming out of beta mode now and implementing across our data systems. And we'll be able to operationalize that into recruitment and also use it eventually to some extent on the financial aid and scholarship side too, where we can look to see, is it money? Many times it's not money that will make the difference to retain a student or to affect a student's decision to enroll. And so we're excited to be able to see what are those other things that can bring to bear in the relationship.
Do they maintain in-state tuition even if parents were to move in the process? Does in-state tuition remain once they start?
There are ways that students whose parents relocate out of the state can continue to retain residency, and one of them is called Forever Buckeye, which is a commitment from the state that if a student graduates from an Ohio high school, especially a public high school, they'll be able to retain residency really throughout their lifetime. There are some other ways that if the student is here and their parents have residency and then they leave, they're still able to petition to, even if for a moment it looks like they're a non-resident, they can petition to get that residency back. As long as they're qualifying for one of the state's exceptions or classifications, we're able to help them do that.
Any other questions?
Yes, if we could take a 15-minute break and then we'll conclude the academics meeting after we come back.
Thank you.
15 minutes? Why don't we just finish?
You gotta trust me, Steve.
What?
You gotta trust me, Steve. There's a method to my madness.
Take a break.
I want to know what's happening. It's clearly something is happening.
What are they doing?
Close to.
You drive the dish.
The good news, we don't leave here. We have to leave here.
So you make all the decisions.
We got a couple hours, huh? You're gonna play again, aren't you?
She's gone.
I'd like to call the meeting back to order, please. Chair Smolin, we are still with you at this point.
Yes, we are. We have an extensive consent agenda that includes the following. Tab 17, consent resolution, paying professor. Tab 18, consent resolution, code of conduct approval. Tab 19, consent resolution, faculty fellowship awards. Tab 20, consent resolution emeritus recommendations. Tab 20, consent resolution, RHE coordinating council appointments. Tab 22, consent resolution, name change, ANS environmental geology. Tab 23, consent resolution, name change, EDU French. Tab 24, consent resolution, name change, EDU Spanish. Tab 25, consent resolution, name change, FAR music instrumental performance. Tab 26, consent resolution, new program, BUS HTC sports management. Tab 27, consent resolution, new program, communication. Tab 28, consent resolution, new program, HSP environmental nutrition. Tab 29, consent resolution, program suspension, HTC French. Tab 30, consent resolution, program reviews. Tab 31, consent resolution, department merger EDU. Tab 32, consent resolution, new department UNC. Items on the consent agenda do not usually have presentations. However, if anyone has any questions or comments, Provost Sayers and her team are here to provide further details.
Could you repeat that one more time?
Any questions? Okay, just a reminder, only voting members of the Academics and Student Success Committee may vote. That's Trustee Coleman, Platt, and myself. Is there a motion to send the consent agenda items to the full board for approval?
So moved.
Second.
Is there, thank you, any discussions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? And the motion passes. There are the following information items in the agenda. Tab 33, 2020-2021, approved certificates list. Tab 34, promotion and tenure. Any questions or comments? Mr. Chairman, this concludes the Academics and Student Success Committee's agenda.
Thank you very much. The board will vote on the consent items, consent agenda items tomorrow. It's easier to say than you think. We'd like to add one item to today's agenda, a new resolution captioned Observance of Juneteenth National Independence Holiday. And I would like to ask Secretary Moore to please read the resolution.
Whereas President Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation effective January 1st, 1863, freeing enslaved African Americans in states that had seceded from the United States of America. Whereas news of the Emancipation Proclamation did not reach the residents of the state of Texas until June 19, 1865. Whereas Congress officially ended slavery by passing the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution effective December 6, 1965. Whereas starting in 1866, June 19th, known as Juneteenth, has been a day to commemorate and celebrate the emancipation of African Americans who had been enslaved in the United States. Whereas on June 17, 2021, President Joe Biden signed into law the Juneteenth National Independence Day Act, creating a new federal holiday. And whereas Ohio University wishes to recognize Juneteenth National Independence Day as a university holiday. Now therefore be it resolved that Juneteenth National Independence Day will be recognized as a university holiday starting June 18th, 2021, and observed in accordance with Ohio University Policy and Procedure 41.125. Holidays for administrative, presidential employees, and classified employees, as well as all collective bargaining agreements. And be it further resolved that classes scheduled for June 18th, 2021 will be canceled, and be it further resolved that the current policy and pay practices will be followed, and be it further resolved that Ohio University encourages all students, faculty, and staff to use the holiday to learn more about the history of slavery in the United States and reflect on the principles of equality promised to all citizens of our country.
Thank you very much. Is there a motion to approve the resolution just read by Secretary Moore?
So moved.
Thank you, Chair Smolin. Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any negatives? Any abstentions? Mr. Secretary, the motion passes. Thank you. I do believe that concludes all matters for the day. Is that correct?
Doesn't the whole board have to vote on the consent agenda?
Tomorrow.
We'll do that tomorrow.
Okay.
That concludes all business for today. We will see everyone in the morning at what time, sir?
8 a.m.
8 a.m. We'll be here. Thank you very much.
What time is, are we having dinner?
This